When Eduardo Garcia, millionaire head of the largest real estate empire in Spain, decided to fake being on his deathbed in his mansion in La Moraleja, he thought he would finally discover who in his family truly loved him and who was just waiting for his death to collect the inheritance. What he discovered in those 72 hours of simulation was so devastating that when he got out of bed to reveal the truth, nothing in the Garcia family would ever be the same again. Because sometimes, when you play with the fire of truth, you end up burning down everything you believed in. It was a cold December morning when Eduardo Garcia, 72, patriarch of the Garcia and Associates real estate empire, with a net worth of 900 million euros, woke up in his sumptuous La Moraleja mansion with a decision that would forever change his family. Staring at the handcrafted ceiling of his bedroom decorated with 17th-century frescoes, Eduardo felt the weight of a life dedicated to building an empire that perhaps none of his heirs truly deserved. The suspicions he had harbored for years had turned to certainty the previous week, when he overheard his son Carlos whispering to his brother Miguel in the mansion's main hall. The words had stuck in Eduardo's heart like icy daggers, confirming his worst fears about his son's true feelings toward him. Eduardo had 3 sons. Carlos, 45, the company's operations director, and his wife Isabel, always so attentive, but with that calculating smile. Miguel, 42, in charge of international expansion, and his girlfriend Sofia, an Andalusian model. And Alejandro, 38, the rebel who had always refused to work in the family business to follow his passion for flamenco art. The idea taking shape in the elderly businessman's mind was as brilliant as it was cruel. He would pretend to be gravely ill, on the brink of death, to observe his family's true reactions without masks or hypocrisy. Who would show genuine love? Who would have already started calculating the inheritance? Dr. Mendoza, his primary care physician for 20 years, was initially reluctant to accept Eduardo's plan, but finally agreed to play the role of the doctor announcing a terminal diagnosis. Ramon, his trusted personal assistant, installed hidden cameras throughout the mansion to record every conversation and gesture when the family thought they were alone. On the morning of December 15, Eduardo set his plan in motion. He called Carlos in a weak voice, pretending a sudden collapse. Within an hour, the entire family had gathered at the mansion, all with seemingly concerned expressions. Dr. Mendoza arrived with his black briefcase and the grave air of one bearing bad news. After a fake, thorough consultation, the doctor went downstairs to communicate the invented diagnosis to the family. Advanced pancreatic cancer. 3 weeks to live at most. The silence that followed was deafening, and Eduardo, pretending to sleep but hearing everything through the intercom, clearly heard reactions that chilled him, not just tears, but also what he thought was a sigh of relief from someone. It was the beginning of a test that would reveal truths more bitter than any real illness. The first night of his feigned terminal state opened Eduardo's eyes to a reality he never wanted to see. Lying in bed with his eyes half closed, he watched the family members taking turns in his room, each believing they were alone with an unconscious dying man. Isabel was the first devastating revelation. She sat by the bed, holding his hand with apparent tenderness, but her eyes showed no pain. They showed pure calculation. Her gaze continuously shifted toward the important documents cabinet, the hidden safe, the valuable objects. When she thought Eduardo was fast asleep, Isabel silently got up and began rummaging through the papers on the desk, evidently looking for the will or bank account information. Carlos entered shortly after and pulled Isabel away from the desk, but not out of moral outrage. His words, whispered in the hallway, devastated Eduardo. His concern wasn't about Isabel's inappropriateness, but about the bad timing. They had to wait for him to die in peace. Then they would have all the time to deal with the inheritance. Miguel arrived in the middle of the night from Barcelona, and his first concern wasn't his father's condition, but organizing an urgent meeting with his brothers to discuss the situation. Eduardo heard him calling what seemed to be a lawyer, asking for information on how to contest an unsatisfactory will. But the most painful stab came from Alejandro, whom Eduardo had always considered the most honest because of his refusal to work for the company. When he thought no one could hear him, Alejandro confided to his partner Sofia that he would finally be free of that burden and that with his share of the inheritance he could open the flamenco tableau in Seville he had always dreamed of. The second night brought the most devastating discovery of all. The three brothers met in the main living room, believing Eduardo was fast asleep under the effect of non-existent sedatives. The conversation that followed completely destroyed any illusions Eduardo still harbored about his sons. Carlos spoke with the cold tone of the calculating businessman. They had to be realistic. Their father had always threatened to leave everything to charity if they weren't up to par. They had to make sure that in his final days he felt loved so he wouldn't change the will at the last minute. Miguel revealed he had already consulted lawyer Herrera to contest any potential changes to the will, arguing their father wasn't lucid due to illness. Alejandro, the son Eduardo thought was the most pure of heart, added the phrase that definitively broke the old patriarch's heart: their father had lived too long. He should have retired years ago and let them run the company. Eduardo felt his world collapsing. His sons, for whom he had sacrificed everything, couldn't wait for him to die. There was no love, genuine gratitude, or affection, only ruthless calculations, barely disguised greed, and impatience to finally get their hands on his inheritance. The test was revealing a family he no longer recognized, and the worst was yet to come. The third day of this macabre performance brought revelations that exceeded even Eduardo's darkest expectations. The hidden cameras captured betrayals that went far beyond simple greed for the inheritance, revealing a web of deceit that had transformed his family into a nest of vipers. Isabel, believing herself alone in the library while Eduardo slept, made a phone call that froze the old businessman's blood. The daughter-in-law he had considered a daughter was having an affair and was waiting for Eduardo's death to reveal everything and move to Marbella with her lover. Carlos, the betrayed husband, suspected nothing, still convinced he had a devoted wife by his side. The discovery about Miguel was equally shocking, but of a different nature. His relationship with Sofia, the beautiful Andalusian model he had presented as the love of his life, was completely fake. Eduardo discovered through the recordings that Miguel was paying Sofia 200,000 euros to play the role of the enamored girlfriend, at least until the will was read. The model, bored with this comedy, was just waiting for the show to end to get paid and disappear. But the deepest betrayal came from Carlos, the son in whom Eduardo had placed the greatest hopes as the natural successor. While believing himself alone in his study, Carlos made a series of phone calls that revealed a betrayal transcending the family sphere. He was selling company trade secrets to foreign competitors, already planning to dismantle the Garcia empire as soon as he took control. The recorded calls showed Carlos promising the sale of premium Madrid properties for 50 million under market value, betraying not only his father but also 3 generations of family sacrifice. The son who was supposed to inherit and protect the company was literally selling off everything before Eduardo was even dead. Alejandro, whom Eduardo thought was at least honest in his rebellion, revealed himself as the most ruthless of all. Not only had he already put valuable items from the mansion up for sale online, but he had also contacted the press to sell the story of real estate magnate Eduardo Garcia's death to gossip magazines. He wanted the world to know what kind of tyrant his father had been, defining his impending death as a liberation for everyone. The situation reached its climax when Eduardo discovered that even his beloved grandchildren, Carlos's children, had been turned into little puppets by cynical parents. Isabel had instructed the children on how to behave during their grandfather's illness, to fake sadness, tell him how much they loved him, all orchestrated to ensure he wouldn't change the will. The children, innocent victims of unscrupulous parents, recited scripts written by greedy adults. Even his grandchildren's love, the last pure thing he thought he had, was a carefully orchestrated lie. Eduardo realized the test had revealed a truth more terrible than any nightmare. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. His family not only didn't love him, they actively considered him an obstacle to be removed as soon as possible. He was surrounded by strangers who bore his last name but had sold their souls for money. As Eduardo continued his dying act, His brilliant businessman's mind had already devised a plan for revenge that would devastate his family as much as they had devastated his heart. If they wanted to perform a comedy, he would give them the ending they deserved. On the fourth morning, Eduardo called each of his sons separately, pretending to want to share his final wishes. What he did instead was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation that would have made the most ruthless strategist tremble. With Carlos, the traitor, selling the company to competitors, Eduardo played the part of the father finally recognizing his son's merits. He promised him 60% of the shares and the company presidency, asking him to sign some documents to protect the company from inheritance taxes. Carlos, blinded by greed disguised as filial emotion, signed everything without reading carefully. In reality, he was signing detailed confessions of all his corporate betrayals. Miguel received the promise of all the international real estate properties and 100 million euros in cash, on the condition he personally handled some sales paperwork. He, too, enthusiastically signed documents that were actually written confessions of his fake relationship with Sofia and compromising from a tax standpoint. Alejandro was manipulated with the promise of the art collection valued at 50 million euros and total freedom for his artistic career. Moved to tears by his father's repentant words, he signed documents accusing him of theft and illegal sale of family assets. Isabel received 20 million euros to take care of Carlos and, thinking of her future in Marbella, enthusiastically signed documents accusing her of adultery and embezzlement. All the signed documents were immediately sent to the Madrid law firm with precise instructions to open them only after Eduardo's death or upon his written request. The true stroke of genius came on the fifth night when Eduardo called everyone to his room for what was supposed to be his final speech. In a weak voice and with tearful eyes, he began an apparently moving monologue about his mistakes as a father and his love for the family. For a moment, seeing tears on his loved ones' faces, Eduardo thought he glimpsed a flash of genuine love, but Carlos ruined everything by whispering to his brother that it was perfect. Their father was dying with feelings of guilt, so the will would remain favorable. It was at that instant that Eduardo made his final decision. He wouldn't just reveal the truth about his health, he would completely destroy the life of every member of his family. They had chosen to treat him as an obstacle to remove. He would show them what it meant to have a true enemy. The next day, Eduardo told Ramon to prepare everything for the grand finale. Everyone had to be gathered in the main hall along with the lawyer, the notary, and the journalists who were about to witness the show of their lives. The test was over. Now the most ruthless reckoning in Spanish business history began. On the morning of the seventh day, Eduardo prepared for the moment he had planned down to the last detail. He dressed in his best dark suit, the one for great occasions, and looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was no longer the dying patriarch, but the fearsome businessman who had built an empire from nothing. At 10 o'clock sharp, Ramon gathered the entire family in the mansion's main hall. The atmosphere was solemn. Everyone believed they had been summoned for Eduardo's final moments. Also present were lawyer Martinez, notary Fernandez, Dr. Mendoza, and, to general surprise, 3 journalists from El País, ABC, and Hola. At 10:15, Eduardo came down the stairs, not with the unsteady gait of a dying man, but with the confident walk of the leader he had always been. The silence in the hall became deafening as everyone saw him perfectly healthy, elegantly dressed, with the sharp gaze of someone in control. Eduardo's first words were like a bomb exploding in the silence. He wasn't sick. He wasn't dying. It had all been a test to see how his family would behave, thinking he was on the brink of death. Dr. Mendoza had simply played the role assigned to him. The pallor that painted the family members' faces was immediate and devastating. Isabel seemed about to faint. Miguel began to sweat visibly. Carlos tried to stammer a justification while Alejandro seemed paralyzed by shock. Eduardo walked over to a large screen prepared by Ramon and began the projection that would forever destroy the Garcia family. The videos recorded by the hidden cameras showed every private conversation, every betrayal, every misdeed committed in the previous 6 days. One by one, Eduardo listed each person's guilt. Carlos had betrayed the company by selling secrets to competitors. Isabel had a lover in Marbella and had manipulated the children. Miguel had paid Sofia to fake a relationship. Alejandro had sold items from the mansion and contacted gossip magazines. Each accusation was backed by irrefutable video and audio evidence. The journalists took photos and notes frantically, aware they were witnessing the greatest family scandal in the Spanish business world. But Eduardo wasn't finished. In a voice growing increasingly icy, he revealed they had all signed complete confessions of their crimes, believing they were signing inheritance documents. The trap had closed perfectly on them. Desperate attempts at justification were swept away by the overwhelming evidence. There was no escape, no possibility of denying the evidence. The Garcia family had been unmasked before the whole world. Eduardo turned to lawyer Martinez, who opened a briefcase and extracted a series of legal documents. The moment of sentencing had arrived, and the Garcia family waited in silence for a condemnation they knew would be devastating. The consequences announced by Eduardo were ruthless and definitive. Carlos was fired from the company effective immediately, reported for corporate treason and industrial espionage, and his inheritance reduced to zero. Isabel faced charges of adultery and embezzlement, while the grandchildren would be placed with Eduardo's sister until the parents proved themselves worthy. Miguel lost his inheritance completely. The promised real estate properties were donated to the Garcia Foundation for orphan assistance, and his tax crimes were already in the hands of the Treasury. Sofia, seeing the situation collapse, left the mansion without looking back. Alejandro received the deepest cut. Eduardo admitted he had always loved him for his supposed honesty, but discovering he was the greediest of all had broken his heart. His entire inheritance would go to artistic projects for underprivileged youth. The new will, read by the lawyer, allocated 80% of the estate, €720 million, to the Carmen Garcia Foundation for Cancer Research. The rest went to loyal company employees. The mansion would become a museum. The company was transformed into a workers' cooperative. Desperate attempts to contest it were rejected with the signed documents confessing their crimes. Eduardo gave them 1 hour to leave the mansion, promising their personal effects would be sent later. As the ex-family left the mansion like ghosts, followed by photographers' flashes, Eduardo remained in the hall with Ramon, Dr. Mendoza, and the lawyer. Looking at the La Moralija gardens shining under the December sun, the patriarch confessed he had built an empire for his family, only to discover that family had become his worst enemy. 6 months later, the story of the patriarch's revenge spread around the world. The Garcia Company thrived as a cooperative. The Carmen Garcia Foundation funded revolutionary research while the sons tried in vain to take legal action, trapped by the documents signed in their own hand. Eduardo lived his final years in the peace of knowing his empire was in worthy hands. He never saw his biological sons again. But he symbolically adopted hundreds of orphan children through his foundation. The patriarch had won the last battle of his life, the one for the dignity and honor of the Garcia name. He had proven that even blood can betray, but true values are immortal. If this story has made you reflect on what family truly means and the dangers of greed, which can destroy even the most sacred bonds, put a like and share this video. Eduardo Garcia has taught us that sometimes the greatest love is the one that knows how to say enough when necessary. Don't miss the next episode where you'll discover another incredible story of how appearances can deceive and how the truth always emerges. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss stories that will make you reflect on life. Next video, a woman inherits the house of her cranky neighbor. What she finds in the basement shocks her.